Well, since you're here, give me a hand.
You kids today have no respect.
Well, that was rather impressive.
What's happening, guys? James Blonde here with MMOHuts.com, this time with a first look at a new 2v2 3D arena fighting game brought to life by the creators of Tekken and SoulCalibur called Rise of Incarnates from Bandai Namco. Now, this fighter is set up more like a Naruto or a Gundam Versus game. In fact, some of the team is actually from the Gundam Versus franchise as well. So, you can definitely expect to see a lot of aerial fighting and dashes if you haven't noticed already. The game was first shown off at this past year's E3 in a really early state, and once again in open beta around the middle of last year, and now for the first time this year, went back into early access via Steam with tons of improvements and changes since its original closed beta. So even though the game is still in early development at this point, I wanted to hop in and show you guys what to expect so far. So, starting out with a little background info on why the heck these characters look the way they do and why they're fighting in the first place. So this universe is falling apart from an unending onslaught of catastrophe that people call the Cube phenomenon. And among the people of this age are those known as Incarnates, which are essentially humans with extraordinary abilities, as you can probably tell. These Incarnates draw their powers from spiritual manifestations of gods, demons, and monsters of all of the world's mythology. And that's why you'll notice familiar god names like Ra, Odin, and Ares. Anyway, each of these Incarnates received a message in their mind, according to the lore, saying to avoid certain destruction, you must defeat the sovereign of this era, and each Incarnate sort of responded to this message differently, which basically determined their reasoning to fight. And that's pretty much the gist of it. There's a lot more detailed background information on the official site, so check it out if you're wanting to know a lot more about it. It's actually kind of cool, honestly. They've got a whole little comic series going on there. Now, since the game was playable last, we've gained several new Incarnates to play as, and a new environment, Paris. And as of today, we actually unlocked London as well as the third stage. Now, there are 8 characters to play as so far. You've got the original 4, which is Mephistopheles, Ares, Lilith, and the Grim Reaper. And as you can see here from the menu, you can read up on each one of the characters in the library, as well as see their move list and watch videos to get an idea for their overall moves. Now, this game is set up so that you have to unlock characters in order to play them. And as of right now, the only way to do that is through the cash shop, paying real currency. The real currency in the game is called IP. The in-game currency is LP, but you have to purchase characters with IP. But I'm not going to really get into that just yet. First, we'll go ahead and take a look at the gameplay. Now, you have the choice to play against other players in a ranked match, solo or team, or against bots, solo or team. And as of today, you can actually create custom matches as well. The bots get increasingly harder after each match, but whether or not you play against bots or players, you earn rewards regardless, including in-game currency, skill cubes, and customization items. Oh, and the game also has a really detailed tutorial system, and it makes you learn the basics the very first time you start up the game, but you can always go back and reference them and pick up the tutorials on each one of the characters because they're fairly different from one to the next. And I would say the intro tutorial that makes you start up the game is probably mandatory because it does take some time getting used to. Now, for starters, when selecting an Incarnate to play as, you'll notice the game has a stock system built in. And what this is basically how much they contribute to the team in terms of really what they take away if they're killed. So, in a match, each team has 6 stock, and when a fighter dies, it takes away from that stock. Depending on who you choose to play as determines how much stock they take away if they die. So, for example, Incarnates like Ares, Odin, and Ra have 3 stocks, so that means they're probably going to have more health and deal a little bit more damage than some that have 2 or even 1. They're big contenders, but they take half of your team's stock if they die, so a team consisting of Ra and, say, Ares together better focus hard, because between the 2 of them they can only die twice. Now, on the other hand, Lilith only has 1 stock, but the drawback is that she is pretty squishy and she can be taken down really quickly by somebody like Odin. But it's not as detrimental to the team when she dies. She can die 6 times if necessary. It's actually cool the way this is set up, because it makes you have to play smart when you're going solo, or choose accordingly when you're playing as a team. Besides the stock system, of course, each Incarnate has particular fighting styles they rely on, whether it's ranged, balanced, or melee. So like Mephistopheles is balanced, so he's got a nice mix of ranged and melee attacks. He's kind of like the go-to character when starting out the game for the first time. It's probably why they use him in the tutorial. Now, Odin, or the Grim Reaper, on the other hand, is primarily ranged, and because the game also has an ammo system that only gives you a certain amount of moves before you have to basically wait for a cooldown, essentially. With Odin as an example, who is basically a walking arsenal, you can't just sit back and spam ranged attacks, you actually have to move around. So this system helps keep the balance in the game. So I've got to admit, despite the detailed tutorials the game offers, it still has a steep and bumpy learning curve. Luckily with this build of Early Access, they've implemented gamepad support, so you're not having to rely on the keyboard and mouse to try to pull off combos, which are movement-based and tricky, to say the least. So I would definitely recommend playing this game. If you're going to try it out, play it with a controller. It's a huge difference in controls, as you can tell here. So with the controls in mind, each Incarnate has a ranged attack and a melee attack. Pretty much, unless you're playing with a range-specific character, then obviously both of them are going to be ranged. Same with melee. On the Xbox controller, your ranged attack is on X and your melee is on Y. Now, you can do special moves with those same two buttons just by holding down the right trigger. And they may do a completely different move, or it may be just a more powerful version of your simple move. And just like the Gundam versus games, dodging and dashing is key, so you can spam the A button until your meter runs out and then fills back up again once you land. You can do this a lot. Dashing will not only help you out by getting into position for an attack, but it'll also let you avoid incoming ranged attacks, which is something you definitely want to do. This game is also locked targeting, as you might have noticed already, so you do switch between targets a lot, and you do that with the left button on the controller. And getting a feel for this is one of the first keys to putting the damage where you want it and avoiding death. Now another way to avoid death, which I haven't quite grasped much of, is blocking, which you can do with the left trigger. It's actually really hard in this game to anticipate attacks, and even though the UI has indicators that you're being focused or shot at, the blocking feels like countering does in most other fighting games. It's almost like you have a small window of opportunity to block, and if you miss that, then you're kind of screwed. That and the blocking feels like it has a slight delay to it, or if you push it, then you have to wait almost for a cooldown on it, and I'd say it's one of the harder things to learn in this game so far. Other than dodging and blocking, you can hold right or left and then attack with Y, and you can do a dodge attack. And I noticed a lot of other players forgetting about that, so it makes, you know, for a nice sneak attack, especially if they don't really know how to block, like I mentioned before, and if you put a few dashes beforehand. And of course, each one of the Incarnates has their transformation of some sorts, and you activate this by pressing B on the controller once you're able to. But each one of the Incarnates has a different approach to their transformation and different requirements, if any, for activation. Like, for example, Fenrir can change forms on command, whereas Mephistopheles has to build up power, then transform, and it only lasts for a short period of time. But at the same time, it increases his overall damage output, so it sort of balances out that way. Ra, on the other hand, has 3 different forms that he can switch to at any point in time, each one offering a different set of moves, but they're all about the same level of power, so to speak. So yeah, when you switch over to your alternative form, your controls remain the same, but you've got a whole new set of attacks to remember. So it gets a little bit more complicated once you start doing this. And then on top of that, you also have the awakening power on the right button that is different for each character, again, but essentially gives both you and your partner a slight movement increase and power buff once it's activated after filling the gauge over time. And I want to say you fill this gauge by getting the crap beaten out of you. So yeah, the gameplay is challenging and definitely based on skill. Playing against other players in ranked matches is tough, and the matchmaking in the game actually seems to be pretty good already. Even playing against bots as a team is tough. Like I mentioned earlier, the bots get harder and harder each round. So the first round of bots is super easy, but by the 3rd or 4th or even 5th round, they start to hand you bits and pieces of your own ass. It gets pretty tough. Plus, one thing about bot matches is that you get to go up against Incarnates that haven't quite been announced yet, like Slayer, which is like a quick and balanced assassin, which seems really fun to try, honestly, and Zeus, which at this point in the game seems really OP. For now, my favorite is Fenrir, if I had to choose one. I'm not really a fan of his wolf form, but his ranged attacks are good, and his melee attacks are super powerful. And in case you were wondering, yes, the game does have a form of progression. Just by playing, you rank up your individual Incarnates and overall account level and rank, which not only helps you with matchmaking, of course, but also determines how you can, in a sense, modify your fighter. So the game has cosmetic customization, like I mentioned earlier. That's one of its monetary elements, but it also has skill tweaks you can add in over time as you get them by playing or purchasing them in the shop. For this, you have a skill grid where you can set skill cubes that act as minor enhancements to your character. Nothing game-changing, just small increases. Most of them consist of melee or ranged attack damage increases, faster reload, which is essentially a faster cooldown on ammo replenishment for the ranged attacks, increased defense against various attacks, like this one here, movement increases, small health increases, and, like this one here, shorter cooldown on special moves. And like I said, the effect is actually very minimal, at least until you get to some of the higher level cubes, which I haven't been able to see yet. Right now you'll notice that they go up to level 10, but even the level 4 doesn't quite change the amount of effect it does. So ideally you want to increase your overall skill grid by paying either in-game currency or real cash currency or leveling up your character, so that way you can place more cubes on the grid itself. You also have to keep in mind how many uses you can get out of each cube, which is indicated by this number right here. Once you run out, you have to then synthesize them from this menu here, and that will restore the entire skill cube. It's basically a recycling program because you help synthesize cubes you want to restore by using old ones that you don't care much about as sub-materials here. And of course, this process either takes time or money, both forms of it. I'm not really sure if I like this system just yet or not, but I can see how later on, in higher levels, it can definitely make a big difference. Now, looking at the cash shop, we see a lot of customization items. Everything from alternative skins to accessories, and to be honest, it's kind of hit or miss on whether or not some of these items are cool looking in my opinion. Like the weapon skins are kind of cool looking, the alternative skins are nice, and the faces are really cool, like this one here. But for example, things like this, two crows that sit on top of Odin's guns for 990 IP, which is the actual cash currency in the game, like I mentioned earlier, that translates to about $10, however you look at it. These accessories are kind of pricey. If you want to give Fenrir a watch, which is kind of hard to notice in the first place, you're looking at $5 right there. The characters are also $10 a piece, essentially. So if you want all 8 of them, that's basically 80 bucks. Yeah, they do have the free weekly rotation, but you don't start out with any permanently unlocked characters. And on top of that, you can't use in-game currency to save up and buy any of these items or characters. The only use for the in-game currency LP is stuff to do with the skill cube, purchasing skill cubes, expanding the skill grid, or speeding up synthesis, like I just showed you. So as it stands right now, the cash shop experience in the game is a bit rough. But then again, the game is still in early access, so they should have plenty of time to readjust things in order to make more sense for a free-to-play game. And with that said, overall the game is in early access, and it still feels that way, even though the developers have added a lot more to the game recently, and it's actually shaping up to be a fun game in general. The gameplay itself is really fun, it's fast-paced. The combat to me is still a little bumpy, but I can't say too much about that just because this isn't quite my style of fighting game. I do think, however, with the veteran developers Bandai Namco is putting onto this project, they can ultimately make a kick-ass fighting game that's definitely unique in the free-to-play market and good enough to attract the attention of the fans of the Gundam Versus series. They just might want to, work on the free-to-play aspect a little bit more. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. The game is currently available for anyone to download and play, and if you're looking for more information about Rise of Incarnates in general, you can find it at the game profile at MMOHuts.com. And until next time, guys, that's going to be it for me. I'm James Blonde. See you out there, gamers.
That was a pain in the ass. Time for the next one.